Welcome to Tipsy's F1 podcast. This is the third episode, so we're still very young, very excited to get going with all of this. And today we're going to talk about, I'll get to that. First of all, the main F1 news that has happened so far has been Lance Stroll. He's had an accident. I think by the time this airs, this news will be a few days old. But Lance Stroll has had an accident on his bicycle during training. Basically, he did what Alonso did. Alonso had an accident as he was entering back into Formula One, starting with the 2021 season, and now he's following in his older, more mature, more experienced teammates' footsteps by also having an accident. So maybe this will do something to Stroll. Maybe Stroll will be majestically amazing and have superpowers and learn to use his mirrors. I don't know. Either way, in all seriousness, I'm very glad that he's okay. By the sounds of things, he will not be attending the testing at Bahrain this weekend, but he should have a full recovery for starting the race next weekend. Aston Martin has mentioned that they might be having Felipe Drugovich or Stoffel Van Dorn joining in Lance Stroll's place for practices, or they might just have Alonso just do all the practice sessions himself, which I think will be really cool, just giving Alonso full reign to do all the practice sessions. I think Alonso can take it. I think he'll want to do as many laps as he can in the car and just get a good head start on developing that car. And what I think is quite exciting is like all that feedback from Alonso will mean that they will be building the car around Alonso, which is also quite exciting news. But I do think that they will bring in Felipe Drugovich. I doubt they're going to bring in Stoffel Van Dorn because as far as I know, Stoffel Van Dorn is in Cape Town right now because he is going to be racing in the Formula E race in Cape Town this weekend on Saturday. I'm very excited because I'm actually attending. This will be my first FIA event that I'm going to attend live because, well, I don't know if you know this, but South Africa just hasn't had a race since I was born. So it's been a while, but they will hopefully come back. And I'm hoping that this Cape Town E-Prix that happens this weekend goes really well to the point where they think, hey, South Africa can host FIA events. Because if they do, that would be sick. I'm really excited to go attend a Formula One race in South Africa in person because I just can't afford to fly over to another country to do it. It is a bit too pricey for me. So in light of that exciting news about the Formula E, I thought I'd actually spend this episode talking about Formula E. So we should call this Tipsy's Formula E podcast for today because I want to talk all about it. Because if you're like me, you have not been following it and you have not been into it at all. And the only thing that might cause you to go into it is if it was to host a race in your hometown, then you might consider it. So I'm in that lucky position where it's coming to my hometown and I'm very excited, and that is why I've been following up on everything happening in Formula E. So what I did to do that was I watched all the highlights of last year's races. I kind of had to use a VPN to pretend that I'm British and then check out the Channel 4 YouTube channel, which that showed me all the live streams, or it showed me all the live streams and it showed me highlights of last year's races. So I have gone ahead and watched the highlights of last year's races, and then I watched all the live streams of the first 4 races of the season. The way that they kind of do their formats, I think there's around 13 races or rounds, maybe 15, like between 10 and 15, between 12 and 15. That's how many rounds there are. So it's a good full season. It's not as much as Formula One, but it's as much as Formula One used to be, so that's quite exciting. And the thing that I find really exciting about Formula E is it is a lot more relevant to cars these days, where they're working on the technology to improve general, consumer road car development, because a lot of cars these days are going to hybrid systems or fully electric, and the technology that they develop in Formula E to have really competitive cars means that they're focusing on making more efficient batteries, which is huge for the consumer market in the long run, especially since everyone's trying to go to a net zero with their vehicles and everything going on there. In fact, Formula E started off being net zero, which is obviously what Formula One is trying to do. I'm sure people are thinking like, oh no, Formula One is going to become electric cars and there won't be any noise. No, I just think Formula One is going to become more and more hybrid. And that is their plan for that. So they will reduce their load on the environment, but at the same time, they'll offset that by doing good things for the environment to help, sustain the environment, which is good. All this stuff is good. There's nothing wrong with that. It might be tough for Formula One to get there in 2030, but I think they can do it. I was very pessimistic for a while, and then I realized, like, hang on, it's not that difficult to do, especially if you've got like another 7 years to do it. And new engine regulations coming in 2026 to help support that. You have biofuel things happening, you have cars becoming more hybrid, focusing on the electric technology without losing the petrol stuff, but just focusing on being more efficient, where they can use their braking to generate power back into their batteries. You actually see this a lot in the Formula E season. I'll go into that a bit later. But essentially, here's the TLDR of Formula E. Well, it's not TLDR. I'm going to tell you a lot about Formula E. They are going into their 9th season, so the sport isn't even 10 years old yet. They've just released a new generation of cars, so they're going into their 3rd generation of cars. So the cars this year look very different to last year. I've gone and watched the full live stream of it, and they've changed the regulations a little bit, but for the most part, it stayed the same. The cars, just what it seems like to me, I don't know this for sure, but the cars seem to have a very specific spec on what they need to follow. And most of the technology that the team focuses on is like the battery and how that all works. So they are focusing on making sure that the teams push all their technological efforts towards making the car more efficient. But yeah, the cars, like, they look pretty cool in my opinion. A lot of people don't like them. I thought they looked a bit weird at the start, but seeing them on track, they look really cool. So I'm excited to see what they look like in real life, because I have grandstand tickets at the start-finish line. So things are going to be great. Regarding the drivers, a lot of people call Formula E the Formula 1 graveyard, where all the old drivers go. I'm sure Alonso will eventually go to Formula E. We might see Vettel there in like a year or two. Who knows? But in general, a lot of older drivers end up going there. Last year's world champion for Formula E was Stoffel van Dorn. He used to race for McLaren. I think he raced with Alonso at the time. So he was also like one of those drivers. There's Felipe Massa. He used to drive there. He doesn't like drive there anymore. Stoffel van Dorn is still there as far as I know, as far as I can remember. We have, well, some people are not Formula 1 drivers who have gone there, but Antonio Giovinazzi, he was one of the Formula 1 drivers that moved there. He's not there anymore because he was doing quite badly. The fun thing with Formula E, actually, this is what I wanted to say, is it feels like every weekend there's a new potential race winner. It's not like the same people winning every weekend. So it seems like quite a varied field. So if you are supporting drivers, you don't really know what you're going to get, because they seem to just vary their times completely with qualifying and with race pace and things that go on. But yeah, in Giovinazzi's case, he basically joined like the Williams of Formula E. They were just not doing well, and he was kind of at the back foot and fighting for second last, really. Other noteworthy names from Formula E is obviously Nick de Vries. He hasn't been there. Well, he did race last year, but he didn't win. His teammate was Stoffel van Dorn, who did win. But he is a 2-time Formula E world champion. And as I said in the last podcast, I think the reason that he wasn't doing that well is that he probably just lost a lot of focus after Monza in Formula 1. I think his focus was like, I want to be a Formula 1 driver. I'm going to train my neck and not focus on the Formula E aspect of my career anymore, because that's behind me. I've achieved great things there. Achieving 2 world champions in Formula E is a tough one. Like, it's not just about the car, it is about the driver. Like, you can see that there's different winners every weekend. So it's not just the car is phenomenally far ahead. I feel like the field's a lot closer together in Formula E with the way things work there. Another Formula E driver that is well known around the driver space is Dan Ticktum. He is well known for his raging on Call of Duty and his raging radio messages. I think that my main gripe with Formula E is they don't tell me the radio messages. They don't show you the driver radio messages. Well, they do, but they don't show Dan Ticktum's ones. And I feel like Dan Ticktum's ones would be exceptionally entertaining. So last year when Dan Ticktum was there, he was in a back market team. They weren't doing well, but this year he seems to be qualifying well and then just not performing in the races, which I think is going to be hilarious when it comes to radio messages. So I'm going to try look for them on YouTube, because I'm sure they're out there somewhere, but that's something to look forward to. That's it for the drivers. I'm sure there are a lot more, but basically most of these drivers are drivers that moved from F2 to Formula E because they couldn't get a Formula 1 seat. That's pretty much the case. There are 22 drivers on the grid, but for some reason the sport feels so small and cozy that it feels like there's less drivers there than Formula 1. Even though Formula 1 has 20 drivers, Formula E has 22 drivers. And yeah, it can be a big mess. It's great. The crashes are very spectacular. Like, I really thought this Formula E crashes are funny, because they lock up like crazy. And most of these tracks are street tracks. So when they do lock up, they do end up just crashing, and then you have safety cars. Because literally all of the Formula E races seem to be street tracks, or at least, simulate street tracks. So even if they're not a street track, they look very much like a street track. The one in Cape Town is going to be a great street track. I'm very excited to see what happens there. It's going to be sick. I found it funny how people were complaining about the noise that it's going to bring. And I was like, well, look, we have live concerts and shows there in that area where we're going to have the race. So this is going to be quieter than that. Formula E cars racing around is going to be way quieter than, well, the last thing I went to go check there was Imagine Dragons. I'm sure Imagine Dragons were louder than Formula E cars. So yeah, I find the silence quite interesting. One cool little tradition that they like to do, I don't know if it's a tradition or if it's actually just a thing that they're allowed to do and that they all opt to do, is they do these burnouts right before the race starts. Like they sort of start on like a dummy grid. They'll start like 2 meters behind, or maybe more, maybe less, I don't know, 2 meters behind their grid slots, and then they're all collectively together do like these burnouts, and they go forward, and that warms their tires up so that they can go for the race and, you know, just not slide off at the first corner. So that's a cool little thing, but it's quite funny because they'll do these burnouts, and if there's not really wind, then the smoke from the burnout stays there for a while, and then everyone just hangs out because they have to wait for the smoke to settle so that everyone can see the lights, because they need to see the lights going out so that they can go away into the distance and do great things. All in all, I'm just very excited to see them send it off to those burnouts and like just go flying off into the distance. I think it's going to be great. So other ways that Formula E might be different from Formula One are the pit stops. They don't really do mandatory pit stops. You would do a pit stop if your front wing is broken, but that's pretty much it. They don't do tire changes. I mean, maybe they do tire changes if they have broken front wings, but it doesn't seem like there's a set compound of tires, or there will be a set compound of tires for the race, and it doesn't seem like they're changed from that. It just is pretty much like, okay, cool. Maybe if they have a puncture, they'll change a tire, but in general, there aren't those like fast-paced Formula One pit stops that you get, which is a bit of a shame because, you know, that always mixes things up. And yeah, there's no tire dig that you really have to worry about. Maybe there is, maybe they do worry about it, but I haven't seen that be the bottleneck for drivers' performance. There are other things though that they have to keep it a bit more interesting. Because everything's power-based, you actually rely a lot on that. And they have this special thing called attack mode, which basically acts like DRS. And, well, sort of. It gives them extra power. So it will give them a bit extra speed so that they'll use attack mode to push over the line. But they can also use attack mode to defend. But basically the way it works is they have to drive off the racing line to go around this little thing. And that usually involves other people overtaking them because they go off the racing line to get... It's almost like a Mario Kart speed boost. They go over this little speed boost section. There's 3 sensors, so they have to hit all 3 sensors for it to count. And then they have attack mode for 4 minutes. And they can pretty much choose how they want to deploy it. They can hold their attack mode, so they can choose to use like 1 minute initially and then use the other 3 minutes later, or 2 minutes initially, and like they break it up in minutes. So you can either use 1 minute and 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 2 minutes, or 3 minutes, 1 minute. And that's up to them to decide how they want to do that. But they have to go through attack mode at least twice. So they end up having a full 8 minutes of racing there in attack mode, which, as I said, again, you can use that for attacking or defending. It's pretty much just like, I guess with Formula E or Formula One, the equivalent is ERS. Like Formula One, they do have batteries that they use and they can deploy their energy. But in this case, it's like an actual software, like this is how it works. And then another cool thing about this all is, so obviously I've mentioned that there have to be 8 minutes of attack mode. They have to use that all up. What they used to do for the races was they would race for an hour and then plus 1 lap at the end. But in this new generation, season 9 or generation 3, they've changed the rules to where they just have, you know, enough laps that should take up about an hour to do. So if there's a safety car, they sometimes add more laps because a safety car could really slow them all down and will enable them all to do more laps. But they will be warned that extra laps will be added. So it's almost like in football, or in my country we call it soccer, or like any other sport, rugby, whatever. Like if there were a lot of hold-ups in the actual match or game, and in this case race, then they add extra time. So instead of adding extra time, they add extra laps at the end just to make up for the safety car. In the past, they used to just add extra time. So that actually left for quite interesting strategies because, well, let me talk about this. At the end of the race, you see a lot of cars kind of slowing down because they have a specific amount of power to use. And these guys use their power up until the last percent that they have, up until 0%. You only really find out around mid-race how much power they have left. And that's when the teams find out how much power everyone else has. So they're watching the broadcast. They know as much as we do about power. So they kind of always look at their power relative to how everyone else is doing on their power. And when it comes to the end of the race, you see who has the advantage of overtaking versus who's being attacked and all that stuff based on their power. Because if you go through about 3% of power a lap. So if you can see someone's 2% down on someone else, you can be like, whoa, that person's able to push a lot harder than the person with less power in front of them that's defending. And that makes it quite, you're on the edge of your seat just wondering who's going to run out of power. And one of the best races, I need to talk about this. I think it was 2 races ago. It was 2 races ago. There was a guy who ran out of power on the line, but because he put his car in such a good place, the guy behind him essentially had to push him over the line because, there was nowhere else for the guy to go. On the left side of the guy, there was a wall, and on the right side of the guy, there was another guy overtaking. So driver number 1 who ran out of power was pushed by driver number 3, or pushed by driver number 2. Let's say driver number 2. Driver number 3 is another driver who was preventing driver number 2 from going around the right side of this driver who ran out of power. So essentially what happened is the driver who ran out of power came 5th. The driver who pushed him over the line ended up coming 7th because another driver came 6th. He came ahead of the driver who pushed the one over the line, but he came behind the one who got pushed over the line. That is a lot of stuff, but I hope you understand. The concept is, it was very funny. Definitely, if you want to look it up, go find it out on YouTube somewhere because it was good. That was such a race. And that's Formula E for you. It's just, they push it to the very, very limits of how much power they have. It's literally insane. So scenarios like that do happen where you're looking at the power usage and what's happening there. And that shows you how the race can kind of adapt, because some people have a lot of power at the end, some people will not have a lot of power at the end. Either way, they all have this sort of target where they're like, we want to make sure that we will have enough power till the end of the race, but we don't want to have extra power. Like the commentators have often said that if you have extra power at the end of a Formula E race, you have failed, because you should be using everything you have to get the best performance out of your car. And the best performance out of your car is to use every little drop of energy, power, every little, I don't know how you really measure it, every charge of energy. You want to use that to cross the line. So that's kind of how Formula E is different to Formula 1. As I said, I think this weekend's event is going to be very important for South Africa as a whole in the Formula 1 industry, because I think if this goes really well, first of all, I hope we have more Formula E races in future. I think it's brought a lot of attention, at least for South Africans, to the idea that Formula E exists. Because again, I mentioned me previously, I just didn't pay attention. The Formula E events, guys, they are actually spectacular. Because I've been watching the full live streams of the previous events this year, I can honestly tell you, because I watched the full Formula 1 live streams as well, these events they're amazing. They're phenomenal. We had an amazing drone, a full-on drone show of, I don't know how to pronounce the name of this race, but it was in Saudi Arabia. It's not Jeddah, but it was in another place, in the same country. I think. Don't hate me if I get that wrong. But they had a full-on drone shot, a drone show where they had Formula 1 cars racing, or Formula E cars, I guess, racing, and it looked really cool. It was an animated drone show. And they go all out. They really, it's way more spectacular than any Formula 1 pre-race show that I've ever seen. So I was impressed. I mean, who knows, maybe this year at Formula 1 we get similar things. Maybe it's just because Formula E starts earlier in the year than Formula 1 does. We might see that now at Bahrain and at Jeddah. We'll most likely see a similar thing at Jeddah, I think. But it was beautiful. I'm impressed. Again, personally, not a huge fan that they're having so many races in the Middle East, but they kind of made up for it that they had such a spectacular show. I thought that was beautiful. All in all, this sport it's gaining traction, and I think we might start to see more Formula E races. And I think especially because more people are interested in Formula 1, they're becoming more aware of the other FIA sports. They're becoming aware of these drivers who are in Formula 2, but they don't have a race seat, so they don't make it to Formula 1. But some of them might make it to Formula E, like Nick de Vries did. And then that might be another option for people to move from Formula E to Formula 1. So that's very much worth checking out. Also, some of the teams, you can see them across sports. So McLaren, for example, they have a Formula E team. They actually bought Mercedes' Formula E team. As far as I know right now, they're not winning, but Mercedes was winning. They had Nick de Vries win 3 years ago, then he won 2 years ago. Then last year, Stoffel van Dorn won, and he was in the Mercedes Formula E team. So Mercedes was dominating Formula E. but they decided to sell their dominating team to McLaren, and McLaren's doing well. I think they're up there in the top 3, but I don't think they're winning. I need to actually go look at the results to give you a proper feedback around that. But yeah, you've got sports like Porsche are involved in there, or Porsche, however you pronounce them. There are like a lot of manufacturers that are looking to get into Formula One in 2026 when the engines change, but they're already doing very well. I think Porsche is the one who's winning actually currently in Formula E, but those brands, those companies, they're getting involved in the electric side of things. And knowing that Formula One is pushing for more of a hybrid system, these other companies that are dominating in Formula E you're going to start seeing them around in Formula One. So there is a bit of overlap, and I think it's exciting. It's very cool. I don't know if there's anything else I've really left out of what makes Formula E special. But in general, it's a cool sport. It's worth checking out. If you're able to look at highlights of things around there, it's also just a nice thing to look now during the off season. I mean, I guess the timing for me saying that's pretty bad because we have Drive to Survive coming out on Friday, which I think this is when this episode will release. So I doubt you're listening to this podcast. You're probably watching Drive to Survive, but if you catch this later, then awesome. We have the pre-season testing starting this weekend as well, which is also super exciting. And then, yeah, again, me personally, I'm just very excited for the Formula E race this weekend. I think it's going to be great. So that's the one thing. Stoffel Van Dorn, I'm so sure that he won't be at the Bahrain testing because I'm sure he's going to be racing in Formula E. He's not doing well this year, by the way. So that shows you that, like, world champions, I think it was a real, like, Nick de Vries winning twice in a row. That's unusual in Formula E, mostly because they have only been 9 seasons. But point is, it's a crazy sport. So yeah, very exciting things to look forward to. I'm going to end it here, but I look forward to chatting to you guys soon. The next podcast will probably be about Drive to Survive and the preseason testing and my experiences of the Formula E events in Cape Town. I'll talk about that as well, but I'll probably talk about that later into next week because let's not overload you with too much Formula E content. Anyways, guys, I have been Tipsy Pineapple. If you want to catch me around, go to youtube.com/tipsy_pineapple. You will see... Well, this podcast will hopefully be there. And also, you should see some live streams that I do there. And now and then, a video that I work really hard on, and it's really good. That pops out like once every couple of months because I'm just busy. But this podcast has been a fun format for me. I'm really enjoying it. And if you can give feedback in any way possible, I'm not sure how yet. I know we're on Spotify now, and I know soon we'll be on Apple. And I'll get over to the Google podcast thing as well. We'll see. Like, find ways to support. The best way to support me personally is subscribing to my YouTube channel. So if you could do that, I would really appreciate it. And I will catch you guys in the next episode of Tipsy's F1 podcast. And I promise you, next time it will actually be about F1. I promise. It's going to be great. Anyways, catch you then. Cheers.